Well, welcome back. So our next lesson focuses on the management of components and really understanding as a commander how components are properly managed within GCSS Army. Before we pick this back up in our handout, what I want to do is I want to take a few minutes and I want to talk about literature that comes by way of the Army G4 or Headquarters DA. So you can see we're looking at a newsletter, March of 2019, provided to us by the Army G4. And here's a question. So do we still use the Department of the Army DA Form 2062? Undoubtedly, the answer is still yes. So I want to cover within the confines of this newsletter, I want to highlight, or should I say, I want to cover those things that are highlighted. So here it starts by saying Army Directive 2018-716, published 5 November 2018, directed commanders and supervisors to update their standard operating procedures and streamline operations through automated tools. So what I want to do is I want to just show you that Army Directive, recognize that this is coming by way of the Secretary of the Army, and I want to proceed to the second page. And on that page, I highlighted our key elements. So the first paragraph I want to look at here, it says, number one, we just read this, commanders and supervisors will update their standard operating procedures detailing specific functional responsibilities for the use of streamlined automated tools as required. I think in previous lessons, I talked about best business practices and what that looks like for you going forward as a commander. So now there's a directive that really supports that statement. The second paragraph introduces an acronym that most people are unfamiliar with, APSR, Accountable Property Systems of Record. So I recognize, and I want you to recognize, that not every unit in the Army is currently maintaining the accountability over the unit's equipment using GCSS Army. Surprisingly enough, we still have select units out there that are still operating in a PBUS environment because the equipment that they're managing is classified as, special equipment, if you will. The third paragraph acknowledges the fact that GCSS Army is an APSR. So really the takeaway here is just as a commander, really focusing on those standard operating procedures. Do they line up with what you would consider to be your best business practices? All right, so I go back to the newsletter. And now the next paragraph talks about that manual DA Form 2062 as a shortage annex. And a lot of us are familiar with the term shortage annex and how that particular form would be applied. Now, if you look at the last sentence of that paragraph, it basically talks about how when PBUS came into existence, how that legacy shortage annex was now replaced with an electronic component hand receipt. That electronic component hand receipt was created based off of the data contained within a technical manual or a supply catalog. Now, the third paragraph, as we progress forward here, this execution order, 10-15, relevant to GCSS Army Wave 2 fielding. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Army's fielding strategy, basically in two waves, Wave 1 relevant to the warehouse, Wave 2 relevant to property book, unit supply, and maintenance. Fielding, for the most part, came to a close in probably October, November timeframe of 2017. So we're quickly approaching 3 years into this. But if you read here, it says it introduces the bill of materials as the component hand receipt. Recognize that GCSS Army is a commercially based system, and with that, naturally, we're going to have to adopt commercial languages. Now, the next sentence is important. Here it says the bill of materials is derived from authoritative sources maintained by the program executive officer for the equipment and, listen to this part, is typically more current than published TMs or SCs since changes require a simple database update. So in my opinion, that means that there's been a shifting of truth. We grew up in a culture that we would take the technical manual or the supply catalog, which we knew that to represent truth at that point in time, and we compared it to our component hand receipts. If during that reconciliation or verification process, if there were any discrepancies, and we brought those discrepancies to the attention of our supply sergeants for correction. Well, now this is all predicated on that program executive office or our program managers to keep these bill of materials updated. We just have to acknowledge the fact, you have to acknowledge the fact that as a commander going forward, that bill of materials is typically more current. Why? Because the process by which we update is streamlined. Now the next paragraph goes on to say for items without an approved bill of materials, GCSS Army users with supply rules, there's a transaction code, and this transaction code is used by the folks in your supply room, which allows them to create what's called an operational support item bill of materials. So just know as a commander going forward, there is very much a process in place. The next paragraph says an approved BOM or operational support item bill of materials replaces a DA Form 2062 for use as a component hand receipt and as a shortage annex. And look, it meets all of the requirements coming out of AR 710-2. Now this last sentence I think is important. Items without a bill of materials or operational support item bill of materials component hand receipt will still require a manual DA Form 2062 shortage annex. So shortage annexes are really progressing, beyond that. GCSS Army doesn't utilize shortage annexes. You'll learn in the next lesson that GCSS Army uses a work order process for the purpose of maintaining or accounting for those component shortages. And again, you'll see that in our next lesson. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I just want to come down to this next paragraph. Again, it's referencing AR 710-2 and being in compliance with that. Down at the bottom here, it talks about shortages and how those shortages are going to be managed in a work order. And we have two different types of work orders that we're focusing on. One is a property book work order. So the PB01 is the work order that we're going to focus on. And then we also have PM work orders, preventive maintenance work orders, and those are going to be handled in your maintenance facilities. All right, the last thing before I show you the XORD here, here it says the 2020 material issue slip shows the transaction codes by which they're generated, replaces the DA Form 2062 shortage annex. So just to kind of bring this back together, what I want you to recognize is this. Within the confines of GCSS Army, we're not utilizing shortage annexes. Now, we just read that the only time that we're going to utilize shortage annexes is when there's not a pre-established bill of materials within the system. So as we go forward, for the most part, into the next lesson, I'm going to remind you of the things that we have already referenced thus far. All right, so having said that, I'm going to show you the XORD. I'm going to go ahead and proceed to page number 4. And when I look at the XORD here, highlighted bill of materials populated from authoritative sources of component data maintained by the program manager. Now, the next sentence is critical. The bill of materials component hand receipt is the mandatory record for inventory and control of components. So very simply, that would mean for yourself as a commander, as long as there's a pre-established bill of materials within the system, that's what you're expected to use for inventory and accountability purposes. Okay, let's go back to those SOPs. Let's go back to establishing those best business practices. So now the question that you're going to have to answer going forward, are you in line with what the Army has directed? And this is why I felt it was really important to start the component management process by looking at this literature. The bill of materials component hand receipt serves as a record of validated shortages. There you go. So again, are we using shortage annexes in GCSS Army? Well, not if there's a pre-established bill of materials within the system. Now, down at the bottom here, it speaks about or references the verification or reconciliation process. Now, if we discover that there is a disconnect between that bill of materials and, let's say, the technical manual, the Army says, hey, we're going to request clarification through a help desk ticket. Now, the last paragraph we've already talked about, it just mentions the capability that your supply personnel have to create these operational support item bill of materials. So hopefully what I just covered serves as a pretty good lead-in. This is where my concern is at its greatest point. What I discovered in my experience, commanders are not losing the major end item. Commanders are losing the accountability over all associated components. So being able to comprehend this new concept is going to be absolutely critical going forward. So what I want to do in this lesson is to show you how we would make a determination as to whether or not there's a BOM in the system. From there, talk about the process that your supply folks are going to use for the purpose of creating documentation for inventory and accountability purposes, and just show you changes that are going to transpire during your tenure as a commander and how important it is that we capture all of this data. And you'll see that as we start to get into the system. I'm going to go ahead and log into GCSS Army. I'd like you to refer back to your student handout. Let's pick this up on page number 24. So the lower portion of page number 24, the very first transaction code that we're going to look at is a transaction code called CS11. CS11 is the transaction code that's being utilized to determine whether or not a bill of materials exists. Now, you can look at this transaction code and make that discovery as a commander. Your XO equally can make that same discovery. But I say personally, all of this should happen in your supply room. The only thing that I'm trying to do is to heighten your awareness going forward. All right, so I see step number one here. I'm going to enter in a material number. I'm going to use the one that's in the guide, that being 01-146-7193. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enter 2000 in the plant field, 2000 relevant to property book unit supplier maintenance. And in the BOM application field, I'm going to type INST. And in this case, INST represents plant maintenance. All right, so just some simple entries, and now I execute. So if you look at page number 25, try that again, that material number 01-146-7193. Execute. All right, so it looks like initially there was a keystroke error on my part. All right, so let's look at page number 25. So when I look at page number 25 and I'm writing this, I'm just trying to put certain things into perspective. The note says the bill of materials displayed should match the technical manual or the supply catalog provided by ASIP, Army Enterprise Systems Integration Program. That's what that acronym stands for. To prove that, all bill of materials should be compared to the appropriate TM or SC for accuracy. Hey, those discrepancies, we're going to request clarification or corrections through the submission of a help desk ticket. We looked at that at in Frago 6. And then on 2 occasions, we talked about the capability that exists in your supply room for the purpose of creating what we call an operational support item bill of materials. All right, so this is all that's happening here. We're just coming into the system. We're making a determination as to whether or not the bill of materials does indeed exist. And in this case, you see it does. Now we progress to producing documentation. So now here, there's a transaction code called zprintcomphr. Now, without reading that first paragraph, basically what we're doing is I'm showing you how to produce a single component listing, hence zprintcomphr. Multiple component listings are going to bring us back to the material situation report. And we covered the material situation report in our last lesson when we were looking at the management of a primary hand receipt or the management of a sub-hand receipt. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to now transition to zprintcomphr. And by doing so, I can see that the material number, step number 1, down at the bottom of page 25, it auto-populates by virtue of the fact that I've transitioned from one transaction code to another. Step number 2, we're going to place a check next to the appropriate component type. I want you to be mindful of the fact that components of the end item are required. Those are components that are required to accompany that major assembly. So we're going to check that one. The next one, basic issue items, like components of the end item, also required to accompany that major assembly. I'm going to check that one. And look at page number 26. So when I look at page number 26, the next component type is AAL, Additional Authorization List. Now, if you're unfamiliar with that category, in essence, we're talking about something that's command directed. Generally speaking, commanders choose AAL based on a specified mission or based on a geographic location. Now, my recommendation to you going forward, I personally would not check AAL, and this is why. If there are 25 components that fall into that category, once you check AAL, all 25 are going to be listed. Now, reality says maybe the commander only wants to maintain 1 or 2. Now, without being overly technical, this is where your supply folks can leverage that ZBOM add process to create that operational support item bill of materials. And I'm sorry, I know that's a little overly technical. I'm just trying to heighten your awareness going forward. The next category, we can see onboard spares, definitely would not check that one. Special tools, definitely would not check that one. And the operational support items, again, this is cases by which your supply folks are creating those bill of materials. Now, if you look at the note here, this is important. We have the ability to choose print to long text, and I'm going to do that. You can see me clicking on that down at the bottom. The reason why it's important that your supply folks do that, because if it's unchecked, this is what you're going to see. Screwdriver, 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 socket, socket wrench. No sizes are going to be included. Why? Because now the item description is abbreviated. So I would always want your supply folks to choose that option. All right, the next thing is I have to enter in a force element. We talked about force elements early on, so I'm going to use 400-38502, just a force element that I remember as I teach, and then I'm going to execute. All right, so now you can see the component listing is displayed. And look at what I'm writing down at the bottom of page 26. So here it says, unlike legacy, which displays and tracks all component on-hand quantities, it's important to understand that GCSS Army considers all major end items to be complete. Again, I'm just trying to explain to you what the system is doing. In addition, all component on-hand quantities are manually recorded outside of the system. And when I first started getting into GCSS Army, it took me a while to kind of gravitate toward that statement, because we left a legacy environment by which all of those component on-hand quantities were inputted into that system. GCSS Army doesn't function like that. GCSS Army says the truck is complete. Hey, Commander, go ahead and take all the components associated with that truck and you account for that stuff outside of the system. And this really just takes us in a totally different direction than what we're accustomed to. Look at the note here, per the Army G4 Accountability Newsletter, bill of materials derived from authoritative sources, and it's typically more current. I can't emphasize that point enough. So as you're going through your initial inventory, and we're going to talk change of command inventories in the very last lesson that I share with you, you have to be able to quickly look at a bill of materials and recognize that truth has shifted. So let's use this as an example. Hey, I'm pointing to a publication date of 4 November 2015, but then I come over to the right and I see the bill of materials was last updated 21 January 2016. Again, I see that shifting of truth. I don't think it negates or removes the responsibility to make verifications between the TM in this case and the component here listing. I don't think it negates the responsibility to seek clarification through the help desk ticket process, you just have to acknowledge the fact that that truth is going to be shifting. Now, the last paragraph, ask your PBO to explain what the statement at the top of the component listing, line out whichever is not applicable, means. Furthermore, how that statement is applied within the context of that component listing. So if I was your property book officer, this is what I would tell you. I would tell you that this statement right here only pertains to what I'm circling. Is this a component listing or is this a hand receipt? And I kind of get confused with the verbiage because to me it's almost like you're talking about the very same thing. Unfortunately, what's happening is units are taking this statement and they're applying it to the body of the hand receipt. And I think they're doing that because there are discrepancies and they don't understand the help desk ticket process that they should be utilizing. I wish I could sit here and tell you that all property book officers out in the field are very knowledgeable when it comes to the management of components. And I'm not trying to be critical of them. I'm just telling you, you as a commander, you have to understand the process. You have to go back and you have to look at your best business practices. You have to make sure that you're being extremely thorough. And now I'm referencing once again your initial inventory. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go to page number 27. And the last thing that I want to show you within this particular process is how I can take this single document and I can export it in the form of a PDF file. So I'm going to, in the command field, you see at the top of page 27, I'm going to place in the command field PDF exclamation point, and then I'm going to press enter. All right, so now once I get past, the security portion, I see that PDF file open. Now, a strong recommendation that I make to you, so you in turn can convey this to your supply folks, I would leverage zprint comp HR for the purpose of producing those single documents. I'd print the long text, I'd select components of the end item and basic issue items, then I'd put that PDF exclamation in the command field, and now I take that PDF file, and now I share them. I put them in a shared folder that all your subordinate leaders have access to. Undoubtedly, that's going to help to facilitate the ease by which the internal accountability for all of that equipment is maintained. All right, so still on page number 27, now we progress into a process by which we can produce multiple component listings, and this brings us back to the material situation report. So I'm just going to go there. Okay, just typing that information in the command field. All right, so once again, the first time I introduced you to the material situation report was for the purpose of producing both the commander's primary and sub-hand receipts. All right, so now if you look at step number 1 on page number 27, let me pump the brakes here momentarily because what I'm overlooking is this. Yes, you have the ability to produce multiple, and this would happen really in your supply rooms. But if you choose this process, then now you're not allowing yourself to select the component type, or you're not allowing yourself to print the long text. So yes, this is a quick way to produce multiple, but you're really removing the capability that is included in the ZMAT, or excuse me, the zprint comp HR process. All right, so I'm going to start by entering a UIC. I'll go Whiskey Delta 8, 2 Alpha 0. I'm going to deselect provisions, and then I'm going to execute. So those steps in and of themselves are no different than how I would produce the primary hand receipt. And I go to step number 3, and I choose the More Functions tab. And within the confines of that tab, I come down here and I choose Print Component Hand Receipt. So now on page number 28, this window that we're looking at, here it says displayed above is a list of all component listings available for use by this unit. So one thing that I added recently in my own delivery, but it's not necessarily included here. This is where I think the process is invaluable. What I would do as a commander is I would right-click on top of this report, and I would choose Spreadsheet. And then I would come in here and I'd save this spreadsheet, and I'm just going to call this my BOM listing. And then now my fundamental understanding is here is a list of all equipment that I'm responsible for as a commander that has a bill of materials associated with it. So that's where I think there's value added in the process that we're looking at. Now, the Excel file is going to open. And again, I see the list of all equipment that has bill of materials associated with that. Outside of this, I'm advocating let your supply folks go to zprint comp HR, let them choose print to long text, let them select the appropriate categories. But I want to show you the reason why I think a lot of your supply sergeants choose this process, because in essence, all they have to do, okay, I'm going to select the first item, I'm going to hold down the control key, I'm going to select the second item, I'll select, here's another item, so I'll select 3, and then I go print hand receipt. So the way it works is the system displays the first one, I click the back arrow, the second one, I click the back arrow, the third one. So now in the eyes of your supply folks, hey, this is a quicker or easier process to execute. Again, before we move forward, you're not allowing yourself to choose the component type, nor are you allowing yourself to choose print to long text. So I really do think it has more of a downside than an upside. Now, producing the BOM listing, invaluable. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the back arrow just to go back to the original report. And I'm going to save this report to Excel, because that's going to take us into the next process by which we can look at changes that have been applied to these bill of materials. Initially, we're going to run it wide open, but then I want to talk to you about the things that I recommend that you do during your tenure as a commander. So once the Excel file opens, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of the material numbers included in this one report. All right, so just to get caught up in the handout here, if you look at the bottom of page 28, so we're going to produce a change report. I'm showing you the process as it begins with the producing of the primary hand receipt. We've already done that. I'm going to page number 29. Hey, on page number 29, right-click, spreadsheet, saving the spreadsheet. So now I'm at the bottom, step number 5. So I'm going to highlight the very first material number. On my keyboard, I'm going to press Control, Shift, and the down arrow. So you can see very quickly now all material numbers are highlighted. I'm going to press Control and the letter C on my keyboard. So I just copied them. And then I'm going to go back into GCSS Army. So as I go back into GCSS Army, now I'm going to go to this change report. All right, so when I go to the change report, on page number 30, very first thing that I'm going to do, step number 7, I'm going to click on the multiple selection icon. So in essence, I'm to the right of the bill of materials, and I see that multiple selection icon. I click on it. And then the next thing I'm going to do, step number 8, is I'm going to upload from clipboard. So there's a little icon down here. I can see upload from clipboard. And then I'm going to copy. All right, now the next thing that I'm going to do on page number 31 is I'm going to kind of run this wide open. So I'm going to remove the from date. Okay, so I'm just going to remove that from date. Again, I'm going to run it wide open. I'm going to execute. All right, now I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to go through the process of exporting to Excel. You've seen me do that on a number of occasions. But let's talk about relevancy and how I think this becomes a critical report for yourself as a commander. All right, so if I look at this OE254 antenna, I can see a deletion, component of the end item, and it's a sleeve. Okay, I can see the letter X in the accounting requirement code signifying that that item was expendable. I can come here and see the old value combined with the new value. Now, What you would want to do as a commander, yes, you're going to be mindful of those deletions, but I think you need to be more mindful of those additions, and this is why. One of the things that we're going to talk about during your change of command inventory on the front end is how important it is to capture the dollar value associated with all component shortages. So what I'm going to say to you at that time is this, and I'm just really going to repeat myself. What does your start point look like? So let's imagine change of command inventory is complete, positive control over all major assemblies to include their components. $25,723 worth of component shortages. Here we are, smack dab in the middle of May. So now here comes your first cyclic inventory during the month of June. Hey, as a part of your SOPs, your battle rhythm, your best business practices, are your supply folks determining whether or not, based on the equipment that you're going to inventory, that there were any changes? Because if the answer is yes, undoubtedly you want to capture those changes. But second to that, you have to acknowledge the fact that that dollar value is just higher, it's risen. So I always advocate with commanders that you create a timeline, month after month after month during your tenure as a commander. You're going to have changes to these bill of materials, no doubt. I suspect you may have one too many lateral transfers in an as-is condition, which again is going to cause that value to rise as well. So I want to go back to a statement that I made earlier as I bring this lesson to a close. You know, my discovery, commanders are not losing major assemblies. Commanders are struggling to maintain accountability of their components. So I don't have any control over the information that people provide to you, but I do have control over what I provide to you. And I would hope that during this lesson, I've kind of set a good foundation as to what right looks like going forward. And be mindful of the literature that we looked at earlier and leverage that literature going forward. Whatever discoveries you make during the inventory with these bill of materials, document them in a memorandum for record. Make sure we're capturing the things that are important to capture, so ultimately you're protecting your own financial interest. Our next lesson, as we bring this to a close, is going to get us into the work order process, another critical component in the overall component management process. So I appreciate your time, and I will see you guys shortly.